Wow,
Hey.
this is exciting.
We're live.
You said
We're
it.
live.
You said it too.
We are live. We are Girls Gone Gravel, more women, more miles, here with Tactic Nutrition, and so excited to be here to talk nutrition. Imagine that. This is exciting.
that.
So yeah, and Catherine's put me in charge of the intro. So there you go, folks. There's the intro.
So while you're doing the intro, people in the comments should say hello and tell us where they're coming from.
For sure. Yeah. Let's hear from you. Tell us where you're coming from, so we can recognize you and like cheer all of the kick butt ladies that are coming from across the country to participate in some big gravel miles this year. But let's kick it off. I think people that have joined us know Meredith Root. You are one of the owners and founders of Tactic Nutrition, and you're here to join us to talk about calories.
I am. Yeah. And I'm joined by our head coach, head honcho, Lynsey Martin, who is not a bike rider yet, but she is kind of our expert on nutrition and sports nutrition. And so she's the perfect person to insert in this conversation and be a part of it. So yeah, we're ready.
Oh, this is awesome. I mean, I think this is always kind of the biggest topic. So before we go, I mean, you briefly introduced Lynsey. Lynsey, can you give us a little bit of a background about yourself?
Sure. Yeah, I went to the University of Guelph to do my bachelor's, there was a lot of nutrition courses in there, but ended up with a biological science degree. Have kind of worked in the health and fitness space for a long time, including working for a hockey strength and conditioning company. And then after that, found Tactic. So I've been a part of Tactic now for almost 5 years. And yeah, also in my free time, I do CrossFit competitively, but maybe bikes in the future.
Bikes in the future. Well, I mean, that's what we're leaning into today, Lynsey. So just to touch base real quick on our little campaign to get more women at the start line for Unbound Gravel 200. We've only got 6 spots left for the 200 of the ones that they opened up, and we've sold out the 100 spots. So that's awesome. But ladies, if you're joining us and you've got a friend that's on the fence, now's the time. We've got until Friday. So get her to get signed up for that 200-mile adventure with you. It should be really fun. And all of that to say, oh, sorry, Catherine, what were you going to say?
Oh, I was just going to say, well, we have a lot of people joining us from snowy places today, as I'm seeing people in the chat. And then
well, I mean, we're supposed
to
get snow here, so I'm not stoked about that.
Yeah, I think it's getting like properly cold down there.
Yeah, it's indoor miles.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm a bit over it. Podcast, there's a lot of great stuff about indoor training in that podcast.
Yes. Yeah. Really good stuff. So, well, like to kick us off, I don't know. I mean, we've got both Meredith and Lynsey on this call. So, I think kind of a good place to start, would just be maybe kind of a basic overview of what you're thinking, nutrition should look like. Let's start with kind of like the on the bike stuff. What you think like nutrition should look like on the bike when you're trying to tackle 100 miles, 200 miles. And Lynsey, if you kind of want to kick us off with that, and then we'll go from there to just kind of get us started.
Yeah, I think Meredith might actually be better to start with on the bike. I can give like the general, I guess, endurance kind of recommendations, but Meredith really lives and breathes that. So maybe I'll let you take that first one, Meredith, and I'll
take the on the bike. And when we get into daily, I'll punt it back over to you. But the on the bike stuff is really, it's not just on the bike for the race. And I think that's kind of what people really miss. You want to be incorporating into your daily nutrition, some intra-ride practice fueling on the trainer on longer rides, so that you have a good base of understanding on the bike. And we're going to talk in more detail about the race side of nutrition in the coming weeks, but really what we're looking to do is set a good base of intake and have a lot of practice under our belts and understand what feels right. And then also sticking within what we know to be appropriate ranges for most people. So from a pure carbohydrate intake standpoint, 60 to 90 grams per hour is where we want to be landing. Distribute that in a way that feels right. And then the longer the events go, typically that's when we might start adding in some more complexity. And that would be something that's kind of the thing that's really hard to test. Most people aren't doing 12-hour training rides. So that experience often comes on the road during events like Unbound. So you kind of have to have your plan A and then have a lot of, plan B through plan Z so that you can handle your nutrition when things start feeling off, which they will absolutely start feeling off at some point, and kind of deal with that as you go. But that all relies on, I would say, good foundation of daily nutrition. Like you can't just pay attention to on-bike nutrition, or you're missing the mark as far as what you can get out of training and racing.
I think that's a great point. So you're talking about like what it takes to just be ready food wise, just with your training in general. So Lynsey, maybe that's where you can kind of come in about like what does it look like daily? What are you doing daily to make sure you're ready for training miles off the bike?
Yeah, I think generally you want to be making sure that you're just eating enough and eating throughout the day. So not waiting until the end of the day to eat all of your calories, for example. Obviously for recovery, we're looking at like micronutrients. So we're looking at making sure that you're getting a lot of fruits and vegetables in, as well as a lot of protein to recover. And then again, for like joint health and overall health, making sure you're getting enough fats, specifically unsaturated and polyunsaturated fats in for that recovery aspect as well.
What does that mean when you're talking about recovery? When should you be consuming those types of calories for your best recovery?
It's really like a all day kind of thing, but I guess you're definitely looking at pretty soon after you get off the bike, specifically carbohydrates. So making sure that you're replenishing those. And yeah, it's really like the whole rest of the day. You can't just pay attention to right after the ride. You have to pay attention to the entire day, I guess.
What are some of your favorite I think I always think about that from the perspective of, first of all, the relationship a lot of us have with carbohydrates has been mixed, especially like over the years, as we've heard different things about whether or not carbohydrates are good or carbohydrates are bad. What are some of your like hacks or some of your, like, I don't want to say proof, but like showing us that carbohydrates work and why you should be leaning into those and not be scared of carbohydrates?
Yeah, I think there's like a lot of research and anecdotal evidence that people who prepare with carbohydrates, who train with carbohydrates and then use them while they're doing an endurance effort and before do better, perform better. If you're someone who's kind of like afraid of, say, the drinkable carbs or things like candy or something, you can use things like dried fruit or things like that, maybe like honey or something, if you feel kind of more comfortable with a source like that. But yeah, I would say that it just shows up again and again. Like you can try to rely on lower carb approaches, and they never work out as well as a high carb approach.
There's actually there's two really interesting bits of research on that, which I'm glad you mentioned. I'm going to go down a bit of a rabbit hole here because it just popped in my head. But I think in the endurance community and specifically the cycling community, there's been an interest in the last couple of years on essentially fat adaptation. So people following ketogenic or sort of ketogenic adjacent kind of diets. And the idea there is you can basically train your body to become more efficient with fat burning, which the theory being you have essentially unlimited stores of fat from like an energy standpoint. So if you can more efficiently use that, then you could potentially increase output and performance on the bike. So that's kind of where that theory comes from. And then there's some science that shows, if you eat higher fat diet, lower carb, you see higher rates of whole body fat oxidation. So you know that these people are oxidizing fat preferentially and frankly better than people who consume carbohydrates. So there's a researcher, her name is Louise Burke, and she runs a lot of studies and does quite a lot of research in low energy availability. But her two really interesting bits of research on fat adaptation was done in elite level, like Olympic level speed walkers. So these are athletes who are highly trained. we're not, so you can kind of rule out novice adaptation to dietary intervention. And so she compared essentially a fat adapted group, so a group that consumed a keto type diet, low carb, high fat, to a regular kind of standard diet and then a high carbohydrate diet. And what she saw was that VO2 max actually did increase in the athletes who were consuming higher fat. So there's that bit of data that says, hey, maybe there's something to this, because these athletes are seeing an increased rate of oxidation. But that is likely because you need double the amount of oxygen to process fats for fuel. So the body's just adapting over time to a more limited resource, to something that is just harder to use. So you see VO2 max go up. However, even given that, the carbohydrate fed athletes outperform at the end of the study in all distances and in rate of perceived exertion. So essentially, like, despite the VO2 max increase, the fat adapted athletes underperformed. Then she repeated that study, got the same results, which by itself is remarkable because nutrition research is almost never repeated. But what she was interested in is, okay, so we see the higher VO2 max. Can we retain that? So is that an adaptation that we can create in an athlete with a high fat diet and then essentially switch over to a carbohydrate diet? And now all of a sudden we have a higher VO2 max. So maybe we can toggle and use a high fat diet in conjunction with a carbohydrate diet, like periodize it through the system to kind of like hack VO2 max. But what she saw is as soon as you start consuming carbohydrates, VO2 max kind of returns to baseline. So it's really only an adaptation related to having to consume or having to utilize oxygen at a higher rate to process fat for energy, which is a really long-winded way to say it's super, super, super well supported in the research that a higher carbohydrate diet is just always better for performance. Even if there's, Tim Noakes, there are research articles, research studies that get published from time to time that look positive for high fat athletes. But it just doesn't stand up when you compare it, when you control everything really well. The carbohydrate consuming athlete will always outperform, and that includes in training. So there's really no utility at all to being high fat during a certain part of the season and then switching to high carbs. Like, it's high carbs all the time. That's how you get the most out of your training and racing.
God, I've been doing it wrong for so long.
Well, we came up in the BS.
Oh, it's like.
So I'm curious, so let's break that down. What does that actually mean? So fat, protein, and carbs are what we call macros. So if people have ever heard, somebody told me they were doing a diet, they were doing macros as a diet. I was like, well, that's just what you eat every day. That was at my gym, not any of you. So what, break it down. What kind of percentages are we needing of macros? We've all heard, right, as women now, that we need to be eating our body weight in protein every day. And so it gets confusing. How many carbs do you need a day? Does it change based on what your training load is for the day? Because I also, like Christy, came from that, go as low carb as you can. I'm like, man, it feels so much better when you eat a lot more carbs. You're not as grumpy. I feel like I recover better. So can you give us some, what should we be eating in a day?
So generally you want your protein intake to be, like you said, based off of your body weight. So usually you can base that off of lean mass, or ideal body weight kind of lines up with that really well. So that can end up being around 0.7 to 0.8 grams per pound of body weight, total body weight. And then you would set your fat next. So once you have your calories kind of sorted out, you can set fat based off of a percentage of those. So typically if someone is training more than once a day, we'll have them around the 25% range. And then if they're training less, once a day, say, or an hour a day, then it would be closer to 30%. And that's just a generalization. There's room for individual preferences and individual differences with that. So then once you have those set, you would take your total calories and you would subtract the total calories from your protein and your fat, and that would go to your carbohydrates.
So just to interrupt you there. So 1 gram of protein, is it 4?
Yep,
calories?
4 calories per gram.
Is it 6 or 9 for or
For
8.
carbs is also 4 calories per gram,
Or
and then
fat is the higher one.
fat is 9. Yeah.
9. I was like, it's 6 or 9. One
We'll
of
get
those.
there.
And so yeah.
Math is hard.
So that's just like you would. So what you're saying, Lynsey, is you would say, okay, I'm going to do. Let's say I'm trying to do 150 grams of protein, and I would multiply that by 4, and that would give me my calories of protein, and the same. Like that's how you do the math on it.
Yep.
Yeah. Cool.
Yeah.
Just wanted to
It's
clarify.
fun. Is there a good way to track that's easy, that's not math related?
How to
Is there like a good program or anything like that you guys know of that's like a good way for people to kind of help track what they need and what they're doing?
As far as what you need,
there's a few like online calculators. You can use one of the, the equation that's about this long. Or you can use I think one of them is like tdeecalculator.net is one that uses that equation, but it just does the math for you. And it asks like height, weight, activity level. It'll give you a ballpark. And like, I think the thing that you have to be aware of when you're setting calories with people is understanding like it's going to get you close, but it's not going to get you there. And so if we're trying to like, be accurate and get a good assessment of what someone's needs actually are, that always is going to rely on some accurate tracking for a period of time. And then gauging, like, how does it feel? Like, are you seeing changes in body weight? How's your mood? How's your performance? Like looking at all these biometrics in addition to like physical measurements as well. And then that's how you get a really precise kind of number.
Yeah.
And I just do want to say that MyFitnessPal, if you use that, does a horrible job at setting it for you. So don't follow what it tells you to eat, because you'll end up not eating enough.
Yeah, it's default to 1,200 calories.
Yeah, pretty much.
It does what?
What anybody should be eating, 1,200 calories.
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, I think that's a really good point coming into that. It's just like having that healthy relationship with food and how important, that is. And under, for the foundation of performance, and just really like, I think we see that it goes across the board to not just how you perform, but also how you feel, your mental health, all of those things kind of tie into it. So speak a little bit to that, like what is that healthy relationship with food? And if you're navigating that and you're, counting calories, like what is that doing?
Yeah, I think it can look really different depending on the person. Like you do want to be able to see the food for what it is like doing for you and how it's nourishing you and supporting you and what you're trying to do. Maybe not necessarily always seeing it only as fuel, because I think that there is a place for food in community and enjoying time with friends and family and that kind of thing as well. But understanding that like you're eating the food so that you can enjoy your life and do the things that you want to do. That comes to mind. Meredith, can you think of another?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's kind of, and it's not even just nutrition. Like a lot of people put kind of nutrition and fitness or, riding or whatever on two different islands, but for a lot of people, they go together. And so there's a real active process in decoupling activity from eating, because that's an easy trap to fall into, which is like, oh, I have to earn my calories. And like, there are some days where you do a really, really big ride and you do actually like, you need to eat more on those days. And that's not earning calories. That's supporting what it is that you're trying to do. And so there's little like linguistic changes that you can make on a daily basis and how you talk to yourself about food. And it's not like, oh, I'm going to do this ride so I can eat this cupcake. You can have a cupcake after the ride. That's fine. But maybe think of it like, I really like cupcakes. This is supporting my recovery because it's carbohydrates. So like that's a positive shift that you can make. And that's going to keep like, I always see or you hear stories about, athletes that get injured or they retired and they just end up in these really problematic relationships with themselves and the way that they are with exercise and with food. And so you want to be actively working on it while you're doing these things so you can stay out of that place when you're, when you have to step back for whatever reason or change or deal with an injury. You really get to see what your relationship is with food and your body and exercise when you have to back off.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, Sherry put a question in here, like when you're doing a training ride that's longer than 1.5 hours, when should you start consuming carbs? And I know we're going to do some stuff we're going to talk about nutrition on the bike in another episode, but like, what does that look like when you're starting to do your exercising? When should that carb consumption come into play? And then I think kind of falling back on that, I know Lynsey addressed like when the recovery needs to start happening, but
Yeah, I can answer the trainer ride question. It kind of depends on what a person's starting point is, but for most people who I work with who do this type of training, I sort of include in daily intake around like an hour of exercise. So anything above that gets treated differently. So an hour and a half, even if someone's base intake included an hour and a half, like people who ride a lot, sometimes their daily intake is just higher. For most people, once you get past the 70-minute mark, you've pretty well depleted all of the glycogen that you have readily available for energy, which also doesn't mean that you need to start repleting at 70 or start replenishing at 70 minutes. It means you actually need to start replenishing probably at like 30 minutes. And this is where knowing what your personal preference is with intra fuel comes in. But for me, if I'm doing a 90-minute ride, I'm probably consuming carbs, gels or liquids starting at about 30 minutes because I like an every 30-minute schedule. Some people like every 45 minutes. Some people like 20. I think when you're doing gravel riding, you need to experiment with random intervals because that's how you're going to be fueling when you're on a gravel bike because it's very it's variable. Like you can't just at any moment in time reach down and get a gel. Like you may be looking at the road up ahead and be like, well, I just had a gel 15 minutes ago, but I should probably like have something because this looks kind of gnarly up ahead. But that's getting ahead of myself. For 90 minutes, definitely consume some carbs ahead of the 70-minute mark, probably 30 to 45 minutes in, and be prepared to probably exceed your daily intake for carbs by some amount, just depending on who the person is.
I also think it depends on when you're working out. Like I find I'm training in the morning, so I haven't had a ton. Like I've just got a little bit, and I get up quite early. So I'll get up and like do a little bit of work and then take the dog for a walk. So I've had like a little something for breakfast, but I've started just doing a bottle even for an hour ride because I haven't had very much carbs already. Like I haven't had much come into my system that day. And I find I don't notice it during the ride, but I notice it in the morning. Then when I'm jumping into work, like I feel more focused and better.
Yeah, I'm the same, especially because we get on those Saturday morning rides together and I'm an hour ahead of you, but still kind of early. And so I'm not having a whole breakfast. And if I don't eat anything, I am absolutely trashed after that ride. And that's like less than an hour.
Well, you guys are touching on that whole fasted versus fed training, right? Like if you're training in the morning, you're waking up fasted, which is not how you should be approaching a bike ride.
Yeah.
No.
Well, and we have established we have a lot of women in perimenopause within our group.
Yeah.
And we know that's not great. Like that adds stress. So talk to us about fasted training and why maybe it's not the best idea for women, especially.
Yeah. Lynsey, do you want to do fasted?
Sure. Yeah. It's a horrible idea.
Okay.
And we're doing this next topic.
It just does. It also like increases your stress response to the training. So then it's harder to recover from. And you don't have any like readily available carbohydrate stores. So you're pulling straight from glycogen. So I think, it's better. And again, it has been shown that fed training overall is just superior to fasted.
I am one of like the case study for the woman that had to break that mindset because I do not like breakfast. And I have never liked breakfast. Even when I was a kid, like my mom would make me eat my cereal before I'd go to school. And it always like gave me an upset stomach. Maybe it was something with them. I don't know. I mean, but I just did not like breakfast. Like I'd have a cup of coffee and I'm ready to go and I'm ready to eat like around 11.
Yeah.
And like I've had to completely switch my mindset to eating breakfast in the morning. Nothing big, but something small to like break that fast, and have seen cortisol levels come down. Like it's miraculous, to be honest, like what happened when I was just like, okay, you're going to eat breakfast even if you don't like it. And I still can't say that first part of eating in the morning, I always have a little bit of an upset stomach, but the flip side of it is that I've seen so much improvement in not only my rides, but just how my day goes from breaking that fast,
Yeah, I mean, most
before
people
starting it.
that like that afternoon lull, like the 2 to 4 p.m. I need to go back to bed kind of feeling. That's something that tends to improve drastically when you start eating a larger breakfast. Like that just it doesn't get rid of it because that's a circadian thing and it's going to happen, but it goes from being like I think I might be about to enter a coma to like, oh, I'm a little tired, but I'm okay.
It also can really help with like overeating later at night, like front loading your calories, eating earlier in the day.
Mhm.
People just find that they're more satisfied and they actually feel like, oh, I actually don't need to dive into a bag of chips at the end of the day. I feel fine.
The bags of chips are so good.
Especially if you What if you so like the people that have to do really early morning rides, so like basically it's the first thing they're doing, like what can it be? Like I know it doesn't have to be more, but to get some stuff into your system, like what can be easy to get into your system that early?
Yeah, again, I think just like in that kind of scenario, you're really focusing on just getting some carbs in. So even like juice, like orange juice, bananas work really well. Rice cakes, even like white rice, depending on the person, like there's some, again, like individuality there, but just like pure carbohydrate, just get some in as long as it's like, at least I would say like 30, 25, 30 grams, and then focus on post exercise eating and making sure you get some protein and carbs in right after your ride in that scenario.
Most people like there's a lot of talk about cortisol in the menopause and perimenopause space too. Like it's become a bit of a naughty word and it's not. It's perfectly fine. It's normal. You should have it. If your cortisol is not there at all, that's a bigger problem. But a lot of people don't realize like cortisol is high in the morning because that's like part of what wakes you up in the morning. And then what do a lot of people do in the morning? They have coffee, which is going to raise cortisol even more. And then, so if you're going into a training session and your cortisol is already really high, I'm looking at you, Christy. You know what I'm talking about?
I'm like such the case example. I'm like the naughty girl. Like that's like what boom, like boom, me right there. You're describing
like,
me.
Do you live in my life? But you'll get more out of your training if you can get that cortisol to come down even just like a little bit before you start hammering yourself in training, because then it's going to go back up as it is supposed to. And having carbohydrates just it's will bring it down. Carbohydrates specifically, like all food does, like anything like even fat, protein, it will also, you just don't want to eat those before training, but carbohydrates has a very, very specific effect on cortisol. So it's like, you can't be afraid of both cortisol and carbohydrates because carbohydrates will help.
Yeah. Well, and I think Christy, you're a good example of like people say, I just can't eat in the morning. And it's like you actually like you can train your gut to eat.
It literally took like 2 weeks. Like I would not go out the door after I ate my breakfast because I knew that there were going to be consequences. So I was like, I had to wait, or like I would walk the dog around the block and come back. Like, I mean, it took time, and it's still, I'm not going to say it's like it's a thing. Like but it has made a difference. Like that thing about the nap that you mentioned, Meredith, like you're like speaking. I was known for taking like 10, 15-minute naps every day at like 2, 3 o'clock. And I haven't taken, I took a nap the other day, and I think I love naps. So I don't think there's anything wrong with the nap, but like I needed to take a nap before.
Yeah.
And now it's like, I get to take a nap, and it's like a little bit of a piece of pleasure versus like mandatory. I have got to go take a nap. Yeah. So it does. It really, I think that when you're talking about carbohydrates and you're talking about breakfast and fasted versus fed, it's one of the things, the keys for me that really unlocked something in my training that was huge and not expected. And I didn't listen to the experts for a long time. It was like, I heard it, but I'm like, yeah.
Well, we got a lot of bad advice, but like the other thing is you're not going to suddenly wake up on race day and be like, you know what I feel like doing before I ride 100 or 200 miles? Eating breakfast. So you gotta it's just like training your nutrition during the ride. You've got to train yourself to be able to like take in a bunch of calories when you're nervous and you're going to be like going to a start line. Cause if you start that depleted, it's you're already starting in the hole for your event.
Yeah. Just so looking through some of the questions we've got, and I want to make sure we hit on as much of these as we can. Supplements that actually make a difference and when they get prioritized. Who wants to take that one? Catherine?
You know my favorite supplement. Creatine.
Yeah, in the question she mentioned turmeric, which can be good for inflammation. I like doing that one if I'm feeling a little bit swollen in my joints. Creatine is obviously might be like the number one beneficial one. It just seems like everything they test
into taking it.
100%.
What's that say?
I've harassed Christy into taking it.
Yeah. Yeah, it seems like everything they test it for, it's beneficial for. Like there's benefits for cognition now too. So it just seems like everything. Otherwise, yeah, vitamin D in the winter can be good. That can be a good one, along with vitamin B levels too, just to get your blood work done, just to see if that is something that you really do need to be supplementing with. But I think, yeah, like generally creatine is good. I don't really consider like protein powder a supplement, but some people do. And that one is obviously just an easy protein to get in. Magnesium for some people can be really beneficial. Just because most people are slightly deficient in it. So it can kind of help, again, with cognition, with recovery. We kind of thought it helped with sleep. It turns out it doesn't really help with sleep, but it can be good to take anyways. What else? Oh, fish oil. Fish oil can be good, again, for like joint health and cognition. There was just a recent study on it on people, healthy people, and whether they or not they should be taking it due to potential cardiac arrhythmias. So that's kind of just like very brand new research that I've been paying attention to. So I would say it's up in the air, fish oil at the moment. But yeah, I think those are my main ones that I recommend, outside of like people who are coming with like a specific issue, like sometimes ashwagandha can be really good for people who are finding it hard to like wind down or come down after training or before bed. But yeah, those are kind of more, again, individual scenarios.
Do you have any favorites, Meredith, that you'd want to add? Sorry, Catherine.
Yeah, I mean, I just got to give a thumbs up to creatine. Like, I think that's one. I'm a light supplement user, and so I recommend a very short list. And I always kind of encourage people to pay attention more to the big rocks, the nutrition, making sure that you're eating a variety of different foods, sleep, like do the things that actually will have a very big impact first. But creatine is one that I encourage people to take regardless, even if, they don't have their nutrition sorted out, if they sleep like crap, like it's one that will benefit everyone pretty much regardless. But beyond that, like collagen gets a maybe from me now. That one used to get a no from me, but there has been some new research on collagen that bumps it into the maybe actually useful category. I just don't ever count that towards protein. That's the thing about collagen.
Yeah.
Yep.
I think I would say that the creatine and collagen have been the two biggest game changers for me, like that I've noticed a difference. So, like physically, I mean, I think a lot of times you can't really tell what they're doing, and but the creatine and collagen are the two that I can tell when I'm. Yeah. Catherine, you were going to say something. Sorry.
Well, one on the creatine, I'm just going to say there's some rogue podcasts out there in the cycling space that are like, and I back off my creatine before an event because I maintain water weight. And I'm just like, that 1 pound, it's fine. And
well, if anything, okay, bro science, there's some actual science behind creatine before cycling events specifically. And they've done this research. It's out of LSU, I think back in 2020, where they looked at like super loading creatine. Most people take 5 grams a day. So they loaded 20 grams a day, I think for 7 days. And then combined it with a 3-day carb load. So where you're consuming, I'm trying to remember what it was. I mean, it was upwards of like 600 to 700 grams of carbohydrates a day. So like a proper carb load for a cyclist. And they saw intramuscular glycogen storage increase by 53%, which is huge. So essentially, like because of the water, because of the way that it works on body water specifically, it seems to get more carbohydrates into muscle tissue. So that's really good.
And I do hear from a lot of women, you do feel bloated when you start taking it, and that will go away. Like it probably will feel like that for a week or two because your body is loading into the phase of it. But like, don't freak out, don't stop. You know, like I feel like any supplement, you probably need 3 to 5 weeks to see if it's going to do anything. And if
that's that's the overachiever in me, which
did you load 20 grams?
Oh, hell yeah. Like, I was like, I went in going, okay, like it says that you can you can preload since you hadn't been taking it. So I was like, I'm going to take 10 grams a day and I'm going to get this loaded, blah, blah, blah. I was so bloated and so miserable. And I was like, would you just back it off? Like it will happen, Christy. Like, stop being such an crazy aggro. Like it was crazy. So I just backed it off. But that would be my tip, is just like, don't, like, just start with this 5 grams and just be chill on it.
Be chill.
Yeah, you can load it like Christy was saying. So you can take basically a double or triple dose because you do have to load it into your system, but you don't have to. It will happen over a few weeks. The other thing I just wanted to point out is like not all supplements are the same.
Mm-hmm.
So you want to look, there's certain supplements that are, I hate to use the word clean, but they're certified for sport. Those mean that they've been tested. So if anybody from the elite field is listening, and you don't know, that's the supplement you want to be taking. Or if you're doing any kind of racing, like with USA Cycling or something like that, where you could be drug tested, like it's really important. It's a National Certified Safe for Sport, and I can't remember the label.
Like that.
NSF, yeah.
Yeah, so that means they've been tested for other things. And those are generally like the kind that you want to look for anything, because that means you know what's in there, because supplements are not regulated.
Mm-hmm.
But they've kind of gone on that. So we do have, in full transparency, one of our podcast sponsors is Previnex. We have done major research with them to make sure everything is certified and everything's in there that they say it is, and you know that the things work the way that they're supposed to. So there is a discount code that I'll put in the show notes for Previnex, but I'm sure there's lots of other good brands that are also certified safe.
We touched a little bit on the bro culture and the creatine and all of that kind of stuff, but Meredith, you mentioned that there are some takeaways that women can benefit from acting more like men when it comes to nutrition. So,
I mean, like all things across the board, we really should be acting more like men in many ways, which is just to say, like, take it seriously. I think that, I was in a bike shop a couple months ago looking at some new shoes because I bought ones last season. They were like middle of the line. And of course, I have worn them out. And so the guy was like, you would not believe how many women come in here. And I try to get them. I'm like, look, like, you need the top of the line shoe. Like, you deserve it. You ride enough, and they won't do it. And I was one of those. He was like, but dudes come in here that suck, and they buy the $600 carbon shoe.
100%.
They're dudes. And it works the same way with nutrition and race prep and training and all of the things that go into getting to a start line and having a great day. And you don't have to have ambitions of being in the elite field. Most of the men don't have ambitions of being in the elite field. They just like riding bikes, and they like spending their money on riding bikes because it gives them a purpose and a thing to focus on. And it can be that way for women too. And I think when we step into that, it's super rewarding to go all in on something that we care about. And nutrition really is foundational to the way you're going to feel on the bike. So taking it seriously, like, women deserve to do that, especially moms who, you might be, you're packing your kids' lunch, like you're making sure that they have what they need. If you're in a relationship, maybe you're taking care of your spouse. And then there's nothing left for you. And it's like, well, why not? Right? Like, you can take care of other people, take care of yourself too. Especially if it's going to make a huge difference in the way that you feel doing the thing that you love to do. And so that's why I said, women really benefit from taking this seriously in the same way that a lot of men do who aren't even good at it.
Yeah.
That's what I say.
Maybe this would be a good time. Just tell us, like, if somebody like hired you all as a nutrition coach, like, what does that look like? What are they, if nobody's ever worked with a coach, like what happens?
Yeah, so with us specifically, I think we're like a little bit different than most nutrition coaching companies, but they'll sign up through our website. And then Alex, we don't have like a system like
Alex is the
Parker.
system.
Yeah. Looks at the person will sign up, fill out like quite an extensive questionnaire. Alex looks through the questionnaire and then pairs that person with a coach that she feels fits best with the person who's answered all these questions. And so then the coach gets that questionnaire and we create an individualized program for that person. And then our check-ins are typically text-based, and we touch base 2 to 3 times a week. So it's pretty hands-on. And thanks, Kayla McDonald.
She's mine.
I got distracted. So we're checking in, we're seeing like how they're feeling. We're looking at their logs, if they're like logging their food in MyFitnessPal or whatever app it is. Just seeing kind of what they're eating, how it's affecting them, talking about how they're feeling in their workouts, how their rides are going if it's a cyclist. And just kind of working with them to reach their goals, whether that's weight loss or performance or gaining muscle or whatever it might be, improving their relationship with food, things like that. And yeah, it kind of looks different for every person. Honestly, we don't have like a template. It's really based on our conversations and where they lead and what the person wants out of it. And I guess also like how much they're willing to like let us in and let us help with.
Yeah. But you're not like, here's your food or here's your meal. Like everybody's choosing kind of within, and you're helping them figure out like how much I should be eating, or like, this isn't working for my body. So like, can we adapt it? Like making those changes.
Yeah, totally. We're telling them kind of how much, and then we can provide kind of ideas for what foods they're eating. But we definitely believe that kind of all foods have a role or have a place in the diet. So
we try to be really like disarming in the way that we talk about it, because I think a lot of people come in sometimes having worked with nutrition coaches in the past or with their personal ideas about what nutrition coaching can look like. And so part of normalizing and helping improve relationships with food is this very kind of like in the background, disarming way of communicating with people. And like when they've made something a really big deal, we kind of say like, oh, that's okay. And kind of not brush it aside, but just don't let it take up a lot of space in the conversation. And then over time, that kind of communication can really help shift the way that someone communicates or thinks about food themselves. And then because food is just very complicated for a lot of people, we do tend to talk about some of the heavier stuff and the body image stuff and all of the things that make eating really complicated. And again, like the more that people let us in, the more we can help with that. And then there's some people who just want like, I'm prepping for an Ironman. I need to know this. I need to know this. And that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. And so that's what, when Lynsey said, it's like, there is no program, there's no template. It's very dependent on the person and the conversation and where we go. Like that could not be more true.
Yeah. I always think, I think a nutrition coach is, like you said, for anybody that wants to invest in your health. But some really key places that I would go, this person should really think about it is like if you have if you're training for a big event and you have some body composition goals, because you can really get yourself in trouble with underfueling quickly.
Mm-hmm.
And there's some stuff with nutrition timing that can help you there. And then also if you have like performance related goals, because nutrition can really support that. And sometimes that's really hard to figure out on our own, especially if you're training, like that's just a lot to figure out. And again, it's for anybody that's like, I'm seeing something in patterns or whatever. But I think those two spaces, if that's you, it's definitely, if you have the finances to invest, just don't try to figure it out on your own. It's like, you're just going to end up like.
Well, I mean, I think just to Meredith's point, like we're talking about the fact, like the guys do it. They invest in themselves like that. And I think, I mean, if anything, consider this us giving you all permission to take care of yourself. Like it's there for you. Like, and you deserve it. So I know, sometimes it's hard financially to think about things like that. And sometimes it's not possible, but this is like, it's your health and well-being we're talking about. And we're talking about, what the other thing I think is crazy is we're literally talking about food. It's something that you have to have it. So why would you not be trying to figure out, you're already spending money on it. You're already doing it. Why would you not try to make sure you're doing it the best that you can? So I think it's really important for women in particular to understand that it's okay to ask for help and it's okay to spend money on yourself if you need to. Like, it's 100% what you should be doing. You've been taking care of everybody else. I guarantee you, most of you on this listening to this have been taking care of other people, and it's an opportunity for you to take care of yourself a little bit. So
Yeah.
that's all I really have to say on it. It's just like, you deserve
We
it.
had a very long ad for Tactic, although there are lots of dietitians that we've worked with. But I think it's like an important conversation about when you should look in. Like, nutrition is important, and you should invest in that. And it's skills that you're gonna put in your lifetime. That wasn't
and if it makes you feel better, it's skills you're learning that you can then share with your loved ones. Like, if you need to be selfish or selfless with it, learning and doing it yourself is also something that you can then share with people around you and help them be better too. So it's like, if that's the approach you need to take, it's there for you. Like, it just helps you. I think it goes back to like the same thing as whether or not you call yourself an athlete. And I'm like, because I've never, no, I shouldn't say that. I think of myself as an athlete now, but when I was in high school and even in college, even though I was doing athletic things, I didn't think of myself as an athlete. It took me into my 40s before somebody was like, "What do you mean you're not an athlete?" I'm like, "Well, yeah, I'm an athlete, And I think all of that, it just kind of boils down for the perspective of like, to be an athlete, to be good at something like that, I have to be fueling myself correctly. And I didn't understand all of that as well as I should have. And I can look back and be like, I think women in particular, we don't have the research. We don't have, it's all more new to us. And so it's really, oddly enough, it's like up to us to make sure that we can continue to push this forward and embrace it and challenge the industry with what is possible for women. And that part of that comes from fueling. So we have to kind of take it seriously. Okay, I'm gonna step off the soapbox now. But anyway,
we have a few more questions, I think, in the sheet. But if anybody that's watching live has some questions, Christy, if you want to look at the sheet and see if there's any we want to summarize or we've missed.
Oh, there's so many.
There's so many, but a lot of them are similar.
Okay, there's one here about hitting that protein goal. I think that's always a question because you find out, oh crap, I need to eat that many grams of protein. How do I do that? So maybe some top tips for that on hitting your protein goal. I'll keep looking through here while you guys.
Can you also talk about protein powder? Because some people are like, I try to do it clean. And I'm like, girlfriend, just take the protein powder.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say that protein powder is fairly clean. It is a processed food, I guess. But it's, yeah, I recommend taking protein powder for sure. As far as like ways to hit your protein, one thing that I really like is to just to make sure that you are still doing, like keeping protein like a main part of your meals, like whether that's like eggs and egg whites at breakfast, like chicken or turkey or beef at lunch and dinner, but also just including some vegetarian sources to kind of help bump it up. So not relying on things like quinoa and beans and lentils, edamame, things like that as your protein sources, but using them as your carbohydrate sources can kind of just help bump your protein up throughout the day. I like that with clients. And then, things like Greek yogurt, cottage cheese, they can be really good sources as well, as long as you can tolerate dairy.
I think a lot of people get it. They see the protein number and then maybe they're not tracking their food, which is fine. You don't need to track your food all the time. but maybe they look up like grams of protein in a chicken breast, and then they do the math, like, well, how many chicken breasts would I have to eat in a day to hit this protein? And all of a sudden it seems impossible, but you forget about all the protein that you get from things like broccoli, grains, like the extras in your diet that you're eating. You don't have to get it all from like meat and dairy and eggs. Like you are getting some from plants. And so there's a real value in plugging in an actual day of eating and seeing what that looks like, and then tinkering around with personal preferences and things like that.
Here's another one. You kind of touched on it briefly, Meredith, about calories that you would be consuming for like on big days and then days off the bike. What should your nutrition look like on days where you're not putting in big efforts?
I think it helps to kind of change the way we think about calories just a little bit. It's the best estimation that we have from a like energy in and energy out standpoint. But you have to also understand like the human body's uber complicated. So on a day with a big training ride, you're going to reduce energy expenditure in a compulsory way the rest of the day. And you're not even going to notice it. But you're going to stand less, you're going to move around less, you're going to fidget less. The body's really good at reducing metabolic need away from high strain activities in a way where, a full day off is not a linear reduction in calories when compared to a very high day of training. So I think that's kind of the first thing that you have to remember. And Herman Pontzer's research has been really revolutionary with that. He calls it the constrained model of energy expenditure. And so that's it's an interesting thing to read about. And he's a big, proponent of, don't think about calories as like this fixed equation, because that's not really how it works, not with the human body. But anyways, aside, like looking at lower activity days, what is the purpose of the day? If the purpose is recovery, then we want to keep we want to keep calorie intake up, because that's a big part of recovery. Not only physically, obviously protein will help with muscle repair, but central nervous system recovery too. So sometimes I even encourage people to eat a bit more than like a low training day on recovery days. It can be a good day for like a refeed day or higher fat to aid in that nervous system side of things. If you're going on like an extended vacation, maybe you normally train 2 hours a day, something like that, you're going away and okay, I'm either not going to train at all for a whole week or 2 weeks, or it's going to be very light, then yeah, like you may want to reduce your intake just a little bit. But again, like you don't have to, because a lot of people, when they go on vacation, what do? They walk around. So it's possible that your energy expenditure is just being dedicated to activities that aren't really high effort training. So we want to get out of that mindset of like, well, I'm doing less, therefore I have to eat less. Like you might benefit from eating less, but you might benefit from eating the exact same that you normally do.
You're also on vacation.
Exactly. Yeah. And you can enjoy food on vacation. It's not the way that you eat 365 days out of the year.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's a question in here that I kind of chuckled at, like, how do I resist desserts?
I was going to ask that one. I was like, why would you do that?
I'm like, why are you resisting desserts? But I mean, like, speak to that, because like I think that's an important fact. If sweets are your thing and they're your weakness, they're your kryptonite. I mean, what are some mental tricks or some things that can help you kind of navigate a way to approach sweets and treats and things like that still make sense because I don't think you should avoid them personally, but
yeah, I think there are a couple of things, and like the first thing that comes to my mind is like look at what you're eating and your relationship with food first. So like, do you enjoy how you're eating as like a baseline? Like, do you have things in there that you really like eating? And then like the second one is like, can you include those things in moderation, or can you make, I guess, like versions of them that you still enjoy that aren't, I guess, like quite as indulgent or, I guess, impactful to your total calorie intake. And then if it's more of like a impulsive thing where you just like end up grabbing it, that's where we want to look more at intention and like mindfulness around food, and adding a pause and reflecting on whether you really do want this thing or if it's just there and you're acting out of impulse. I think bringing that awareness can be super, super impactful. And then something that Precision Nutrition recommends is called a nourishment menu. So if there is something and you don't feel, if you've kind of decided that this is more of like an impulsive thing that I'm doing and it's not just a matter of like trying to fit it in, if I have some of this, I'm going to eat all of it kind of thing, is making a list of things that might actually serve you better. So this is more kind of like when you get into like the stress eating kind of things where it's like, you would have a list on this menu of things that might be helpful instead of eating that dessert or eating those sweets. So it can be like going for a walk, listening to music, like snuggling with your dog, like whatever sounds like good to you that might help fill that need instead. And then once if you get through that list and you still feel like you need it, then kind of the next step would be to portion it out and again, eat it like really mindfully and intentionally so that you don't go overboard with it.
I like that. Catherine, you got any others?
There were a couple of questions about hormones, and so I did want to ask those because we are women focused. I know, Meredith, you've done some research on what's the deal. Do you eat with your hormones, or like obviously sometimes we feel more hungry or we're craving certain things, or we did have a woman a few weeks ago that was like, as my hormones are changing, I feel like every time I eat a carb, I gain 5 pounds. So just everything you know about hormones.
Yeah, I mean,
in like 5 minutes.
We've got 4 minutes and 45 seconds.
End this by an hour, right?
Yeah, right.
It's complex. And so this conversation exists both in the menopause, perimenopause space, but then also in the female athlete space, because there's a lot of research being done on the menstrual cycle and impacts of things like hormonal birth control on performance. And so researchers are looking at the performance side of things, but also the nutrition side of things. And so this is a big area of focus for Kelly McNulty, who's a researcher out of the UK. And so her main area of focus is on women's performance and nutrition, specifically within the realm of sports performance. And so what she has found, and she's done two meta-analyses on this. So it's the research is very, very high quality because it's a compilation of studies that exist. And even though the scientific body is quite small, like her inclusion criteria is really good. And there have been quite a few studies on this. And so unfortunately, it's not an easy answer. And what the data shows and suggests is that it really should be handled on a very individual level, which is to say that some women do experience performance impacts around their menstrual cycle and also during menopause. And that includes nutrition. Some women benefit from a higher fat intake in, I think, the luteal phase of their cycle, and then a higher carb intake in their follicular phase. Lynsey, you might know that. I'm sort of blanking. That's right. Okay. Yeah, good. Because glycogen utilization does change. Estrogen is a modulator for that, but the extent to which it will impact a person is person dependent. So some women need to pay attention to it and may benefit from that, and some don't. I like to think about from an eating standpoint, there's a big difference between an eating habit. Like habits and cravings are quite different when it comes from food. Or when it comes to food. And cravings are something that you should definitely be paying attention to, because maybe we're craving chocolate or cupcakes, but your brain knows what that food is, but your body's just like, I really want some simple carbohydrates right now. And so that's something that we do want to pay attention to. And maybe we give a less indulgent version of a carbohydrate to someone and see if that craving goes away. Because if it does, that's a legitimate craving for an actual macronutrient, and that really matters. A craving that exists around the clock, outside of cycle related, doesn't matter if you eat things like that, may be an eating habit, and that gets treated differently. But we always want to be mindful of what our cravings are, because our body is going to tell us what it needs. And women are really in a horrible habit, and it's not our fault. It's the fault of society. We believe that we can't trust our bodies and what they tell us, and we can. And so it's hard when you get all the way to perimenopause to learn that. That's a hard time to learn anything. And certainly as it pertains to things that your body's telling you, because your body is in many times changing. So you just have to kind of be gentle with that process. You know, the science around eating for women in menopause, again, like there's not enough of it to say like, yes, we should avoid carbohydrates, we should fast, we should do this. There's just not a huge body of research. But what we do know is protein helps, big breakfast helps, and eating routinely. I mean, the thing is like, setting in place a good baseline and a very stable and very routine diet may be boring, but it is one of the best diagnostic tools that we have, especially going through the menopause transition, because it allows us to hold constant something that's very important. And then if things are still changing and feeling weird, we know that that is related to hormones and something that's not directly related to diet. Whereas if our diet's just all over the place, we're introducing so much variability that it's hard to even say or assess what's causing what. So that's my tangent on that.
I like Celine always is like, we're not a petri dish. Like you have to listen to your body. And, you know, like if anybody is telling you this works for everybody, like run from that advice.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yep.
Is there anything else that you all really want people to know about nutrition or supporting your training with nutrition before we go?
I think just one of the questions that kind of stood out to me was a woman asking about like low energy availability in that perimenopausal space. And that is something that I've spent quite a bit of time like reading about. And in that transition or in that phase of life, we're already kind of battling against a loss of bone mineral density for one. And then there are other possible issues with low energy availability that don't have anything to do with the menstrual cycle. So her kind of question was that, like, you know, I'm not at risk of losing my menstrual cycle, so is it even kind of like a risk for me? And it still is. And so we still see things like impacts on immune function, on digestion, things like that. And then just like if we're looking again, she's like a cyclist or someone who enjoys mountain biking, I think. So those things are still going to show up if you're not eating enough. You're still going to have performance impacts just because you don't have a menstrual cycle. So can low energy availability and REDs still be a concern for that population? I would say the answer is yes. And yeah, it kind of goes along with like, as women, like just because you're in that phase, like you still deserve to eat, like you still deserve to fuel your exercise kind of thing. So that one stuck out to me.
Yeah, and we're definitely, so our next podcast is we're gonna have Meredith back. She's just gonna become one of the co-hosts at the end of this. And then we have Paige Onweller joining us, and we're gonna talk more about actual training, like bike nutrition and race day nutrition. But she also wanted to go a little more into that topic as well. So we'll dive much more into that. But maybe y'all heard this study too. There was a study they did. It was of cyclists, and it was females. I believe it was female cyclists, but they were able to restrict one group's energy intake, which you normally can't do, right? Like you're just trying. So they were in some kind of environment where they were able to monitor their food, and they restricted. It was through liquid calories, and the group that had less calories, so they were in low energy availability, which is when you're just not eating enough to match your caloric demands or your demands. The word's not more. You know what I'm saying. They lost in 2 weeks. They had a 7% decrease in performance. So, like, if you think how hard you work to get a 7% increase in performance, like how many weeks you put it on the bike to see your FTP rate 7%, or to get like that extra. And like not eating enough within 2 weeks, they're seeing a 7% decrease. Like
you wouldn't do that.
You would do that. Like,
I mean, you just wouldn't do that. Like it doesn't make any sense. And I think that it just kind of goes to that whole point of like, if you're putting in the work, do the work.
Yeah.
Like, you know, so.
Yeah. And that's like, and I'm sure we'll talk more about it, but it affects all bodies too. Like the female athlete triad was, I think, originally thought to really only impact like young girls, small bodies in like early menstruation sort of time frame. And now not only does it affect all women, all ages, it also affects men. And it has a long list of side effects. And when you think about it, it makes sense because you're not even people who arguably have a bit of weight to lose, you might be tempted to go into a very big calorie deficit to do that. But you have to remember, maybe you have stored energy in the form of body fat that you can use, but there's no micronutrients in that. Like, you really have to watch out for legitimate nutrient deficiency when you're doing that, especially if you're combining it with any kind of exercise with performance goals in mind. So
yeah. So we will definitely dive much more into that. But yes, I think it's worth bringing up in every podcast we ever talk about nutrition, because I think especially low energy availability is quite common in active women. So tell us where they can find you all if they want to learn more about Tactic.
Yep, they can find us. We have 2 websites. Our nutrition one is tacticmethod.com. We also have a workout site that's tacticworksout.com. We're on Instagram at Tactic Nutrition. I'm at Meredith_root. And I'm so sorry, I don't know your handle, Lynsey. Sorry.
It's Lyns Martin, Lyns Martin.
Yep.
Yeah. And Meredith and her wife, Alex, also have a great podcast called Afternoon Snack. I listen to it quite often. They talk about nutrition like every 3 or 4 episodes. But the episodes about nutrition are really good. I really liked your one about metabolic, like metabolism.
Oh, the toggles. Yeah, I wasn't sure if anyone was going to like that one, and then it was a hit. So
yeah, so there's a really great one about metabolism. It's worth going to listen to that whole episode because, again, that whole conversation of calories in, calories out. It's not that simple.
Yeah.
And as we can see, Meredith really likes the research.
Oh, I love it.
Yeah,
I love it. So I was going to say, we did not, like, the one thing that really I thought helped my nutrition more than anything was sleeping better.
Oh yeah, and there's so much research on that too. It's crazy. Yeah, there's all
it's
these,
a cycle. Yeah,
there's bi-directional. Yeah,
if you're under fueling, you typically have more. That's a sign that you're probably under fueling is poor sleep.
Yep.
Christy.
No, I'm over fueling, baby. I'm sleeping like a baby right now. Oh God. Like, yeah, that alarm goes off and I'm like, no, I'm good. I'm sleeping really well.
No, thank you.
Awesome. Well, we will be back in 2 weeks with Paige Onweller and Meredith. And then we just booked Celine Yeager to answer all of your questions about hormones. So that's going to be a really exciting one. So we can talk about menopause. We can talk perimenopause. She also was the co-author on Roar, which is Dr. Stacy Sims' book. So she could talk about all the phases of life. You haven't even heard this yet, Christy, but this is a sneak peek, so I hope it happens, but I think it's going to happen. We think Precision Fuel and Hydration is going to come on, and they are going to do some live, we're going to pick 2 people to do some live coaching on what you should be doing, like putting together your plan. And then they also have a heat expert that can do a podcast with us, like how to adapt to the heat, especially for those that might be coming down to Kansas and it could be hot and you're not coming from a hot place.
We are due for a hot year, so you'll all find out. That's the one I don't like because people are never ready. So
we're going to get you ready.
Can't hide from it. Yep, we're going to get you ready.
So
and there's still like 6 or 7 spots, ladies. 200 miles.
6 or 7 spots. So sign up. Come join us at camp in April. And thank you to our partners, Feisty, Tactic, Unbound Gravel, and we will see y'all soon. At least I know where